Hello, everyone. My name is Jones-Brewster, and I'm the narrative designer of We Should Talk.
And hi, I'm Carol Mertz. I am the producer and one of the designers of We Should Talk.
And thank you so much for being here. As a celebration of the wonderful support we've received from our Kickstarter backers, we've decided to share this talk with you that we originally gave last November at the Wordplay Festival in Toronto, entitled The Design of We Should Talk, putting a new spin on player choice. Now, We Should Talk is a short form narrative game where players think carefully about the words they choose.
The key to We Should Talk is the sentence spinner. It's a unique narrative choice mechanic that we created to let players express themselves in a way that most games just don't allow. The sentence spinner lets players craft sentences in response to the in-game characters. By carefully choosing their words in this way, players discuss ongoing problems about life and romance with their partner over text messages, while also chatting with friends and strangers at a favorite local bar about what's on their mind. The combination of words they choose affects how genuine of a connection they have with their partner, which of the many endings they discover, and whether their relationship can survive the night. Throughout this session, we're going to aim to explore why and how we came up with this unique choice mechanic, the sentence spinner, and how we tackled the challenges around designing for modular choice in this way. For context, we'd like to show you the trailer for We Should Talk so that you can see the sentence spinner in action and have a better idea of what we'll be discussing. I'm just over here vibing to that music. So our initial goal with We Should Talk was to create a game that offered a more human, less transactional approach to games than, rather, less transactional approach to relationships, than we often see in other games. When we play role-playing games or simulation games and things like this, we find ourselves being asked to give gifts or say or do the right thing in order to build romance and relationships. But we never really feel like that's actually true to the nuances of actual relationship building. So in designing We Should Talk, it wasn't our intention to ask players what it means to be the perfect partner, the way that we often feel like we're being asked to find the right gift or say the right thing, but rather we're asking players to look into how small changes in conversation can impact the bigger picture. And then we hope that they actually replay it and explore and experiment how different choices could impact those conversations and the outcomes thereof. We ultimately feel like this is a more natural approach to choice design. It helps us channel the feelings that we have during real world interactions. When we have tough conversations, or any conversation really, we can feel like we're constantly analyzing the things that we could or should say. Sometimes our goals affect our available options in our own minds, and sometimes when we act or speak too quickly, we say things we regret or that we could have worded more carefully. For example, when your ex suddenly comes into town and begins reflecting on the end of your relationship, what do you say? Who do you blame? Do you take responsibility for the end of the relationship, or do you blame it on them? The modularity of choice in We Should Talk draws a lot of inspiration from relationship psychology. encouraging players to slow down and consider the impact of something as simple as deciding whether to say I, you, or we. We also wanted to capture the feeling of texting with someone you care about. We feel like predictive text can sort of take away some of the agency that we have over our options, or suggest we say something we might not have even considered in a way that we may not have even worded it ourselves. We Should Talk embraces that intervention of technology, sometimes guiding players into a slew of unexpected places, occasionally even leading them into the uncomfortable conversation that they were trying their hardest to avoid. And for the sake of creating that more fruitful and impactful narrative, on top of the fact that the sentence spinner is designed to create that level of personality and that level of expression, we wanted the characters of We Should Talk to represent the diverse multicultural backgrounds of the team, while also representing differing levels of intimacy. Our goal was to allow players to choose their own path, whether that means enacting a situation that feels true to life, or allowing them to explore the idea of being a kind of person they never thought they could. We chose to have all of the conversations represent varying levels of intimacy to encourage players to use We Should Talk as something of a relational playground, giving the opportunity to explore tone, self-expression, and different kinds of experience through conversation. Here in the middle, we have Steph, the friendly bartender. On the left, we have Jimmy, the questionable stranger. And on the right is Dante, the reappearing ex, and not pictured as Sam, your codependent partner, who all of these characters are not only modeled and inspired by the experiences, races, nationalities, gender, and sexual identity of members of the development team, but also represent a different kind of relationship, a different kind of conversation, and a different level of closeness to the player.
We designed our sentence spinner to allow the player to have the flexibility to explore those varying relationships. And part of the development of the sentence spinner was the custom dialogue parser created in Unity that team member Jack Schlesinger developed. This parser gives us a way to lay out our dialogue and multiple choice options. Plus, we can call event triggers that unlock specific conversations, change narrative variables, and character model expression changes. The system allows us to make sure that players not only have one obvious narrative choice, but rather a myriad of choices available for every response, potentially guiding the dialogue in a number of directions, while the story and characters react to the decisions in a meaningful way. You can see this come together in the spreadsheets that we use to implement the writing. Here is where we control all the physical expressions for each of the models of the characters, trigger specifically themed conversations, and the variables we use to determine the endings, which we'll go into a little bit later. Most importantly, of course, this is where all the dialogue and choices are written.
So as Jordan was saying, you can kind of see how this is set up. So since I have control of the mouse, I'd like to walk us through this a little bit more detailed. So you can see we specifically call out where we're going to have a dialogue trigger, and then when we have our choice, we tell it how many choices we're going to make, and then we give it all the different many choices, especially in this case, separated by a semicolon. And this allows us to break things down. We didn't write it directly in the spreadsheet because who loves writing like this in a spreadsheet? But this is the way that we're pulling it into the software to be able to actually implement it into the game. Something else I'd like to note is here where it shows relationship feelings. This is actually how, rather than the endings being a result of a specific path that you take in the game, this is actually how we're tracking how the player is responding in certain situations. So we're gauging your tone, we're gauging your reaction, and keeping score, so to speak, behind the scenes, where you don't necessarily know how many scores you have and what your score is, but we as the designers are taking that and using that as a consideration for what ending to deliver you, as opposed to a specific branching path.
Now, the challenge of writing all of those choices is that the possibility space is so large that writing each option becomes a puzzle. Most of the dialogue options in the game have the 3x3 structure that you see here. As a result, we're not writing 3 dialogue options, but at least 9 possible fragments of what would really be 27 or more different sentences that could become the final option.
So much.
In just this introductory conversation that you see here, there are 240 possible choices. Because of that, we often find ourselves spending a lot of time not only wondering, does this choice move the story forward in a way that makes sense, or that I want? But also, can we write 27 coherent responses to this statement that all make sense? That turned the process of writing to the sentence spinner more comparable to writing a puzzle for every choice. Each option is a small addition to our sentence spinner that could drastically extend how long it would take to make all the possible choices make sense. In addition to that, writing the actual content of those choices also proved to be a challenge. We Should Talk was designed to stimulate the experience that predictive texting provides, which means that it was important for us to also include the slang and shorthand often used when texting someone close. As a result of that, however, if one choice has one grammatical error or a piece of slang that doesn't quite resonate, it can completely take the player outside of the experience. This means that there's a large amount of testing required to make sure that the experience makes sense to a broad player base as possible. As you can imagine, testing all the possible options in just one conversation is an endeavor that can take hours. And with a team of only 6 members, the playtesting was a huge part of all 6 of our responsibilities. This way of writing also made it a challenge to prevent overscoping the narrative. With so many different possible ways of responding to each choice, there could be countless narrative threads that could offer the player more backstory, or interesting story paths, and unexpected conversations that could add a lot of depth to the overall experience. We often found ourselves with a lot of opportunities to follow interesting narrative threads that arose out of our choice writing. But the interesting threads didn't always make up for the development time necessary to write all of the corresponding choices for those paths. There were, of course, many moments in development where pulling on an interesting thread led to a captivating conversation, but there were probably far more moments where a similar thread led to us wasting loads of times, writing choices that we couldn't simply come up with good solutions to write 27 different ways. Keeping in mind the time and workload necessary to write, as well as our goal to make this game a short experience, you often see choices like this. Here, you can see the sentence spinner not only provide you with a direction to take the conversation, but also adds additional information about the characters that might not come out as a result of your choices. For example, here you see the main character talking with Dante, an old acquaintance that just came back to town. He says he wasn't expecting to see you, leaving you with the option of saying something like, I wasn't expecting to see a Michael B. Jordan wannabe, or, it's not every night that I come across an ex. Now, these choices tell you that he's your ex-boyfriend without having to go through specific routes to discover that information, even if you don't choose that route. While the branching in this choice is fairly explicit, talking about your old relationship, teasing an old friend, or passively moving along the conversation, we wanted to make sure some of the choices reflected more of a, it's not what you say, it's how you say it philosophy. Now here on the other hand, we have Jimmy, a complete stranger to you who clearly mistakes you for a Tinder date and approaches you saying, hey, you're too hot to handle, right?
Jimmy.
And that leads you to possibly say, sorry, Jimmy, I think you've got the wrong person, or not in this lifetime. Looks like you got stood up. All of these choices show a different way to turn someone down when being approached at a bar. Whether it's addressing the silly screen name he mistakes you for, or telling Jimmy that you just got stood up, they take different tones. None of the options are necessarily right or wrong. All of just different enough for the player to feel like they can personalize their choice, while still conveying similar sentiments. However, depending on how the player handles that initial response, the routes from this choice lead to very different places. Some paths result in a conversation that leads Jimmy hitting on you, while others lead to Jimmy venting to the player about his dating, family, and life troubles. These represent varying responses to a small interaction that can happen at any bar. We want the players to feel like branching that happens within these conversations are a result of how they express their feelings, not whether or not they said the right or wrong thing.
Right. And so when people play We Should Talk, one of the biggest questions that we get is why we designed the sentence spinner the way that we did. Why didn't we make it feel more gamey, like a slot machine, for example, where we, add a spin at first where it feels randomized or something. But the fact is, we actively avoided randomness with our sentence spinner because we didn't want serious, intimate choices to feel like a roulette or a slot machine or a gamble. That said, looking at the possible future of this mechanic and what designers might do moving forward, we could imagine that there's a ton of space to explore risk versus reward in randomly selected choices like that. For example, a game like Clue already uses randomness and modularity similar to this, actually, to create procedurally generated narrative outcomes and scenarios. If you think about it, it was, Mrs. White in the kitchen with the pipe. That's all very similar to the way that our sentence spinner works. There's 3 different pieces and there's a myriad of options within those pieces. So it could be any of a number of different outcomes. We could see this used to an even greater depth with other games, whether random or not. Similarly, modular choice could be used to select action mechanics, generate character backgrounds or narrative scenarios, or any of a number of other things. The use of the mechanic could be core to the full game the way that it is in We Should Talk, or it could just be used as a surprise in little bits and pieces throughout a game to add a fresh sense of depth and player agency. We don't think that this is going to be the last time we see a mechanic like this, but also it's really hard to predict how other designers might find value and opportunity in this level of modular choice. We see a lot of opportunities here for adding depth to choice, both narrative and otherwise. And we're really excited to see how other designers might work with this sort of structure in the future. And that's the presentation. So we're so grateful that everybody tuned in for this. And while this portion is actually pre-recorded because Jordan and I wanted to make sure that we could do everything the way that we wanted to do it, we're going to switch over really quickly to a live Q&A so that everybody in the chat can ask us questions and the whole team is going to be available to respond. So get your questions ready, start throwing them in the chat. And, let us know what you think. Let us know if you have thoughts. And we would love to be here and answer questions with you for a while. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Stay tuned.
All right, and we are going live here now for a live Q&A. So everything should be good now. Audio should be going. Hi, everyone. My name is Francesca. I'm also a part of the team working on We Should Talk. You've already met Carol and Jordan, but now they're here. Now they're here live, and we're going to be answering some questions. We'll be taking questions from chat, both in Twitch and on Steam. Yeah, we're really excited to do this. So I guess
We
like,
already have, sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I
I
was
was
going
gonna,
to say, I'm so excited that we already have questions rolling in on both
right?
Twitch and Steam. It
Yeah.
feels like, so we had like these pre-prepared questions like, oh, what if nobody is in chat?
Yeah, I was gonna jump right into one of those questions, but I think we should go ahead and take some of the ones from chat so we can get the ball rolling here.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. The first question that we got was from Thor on Steam.
mhm.
They were curious why we chose a visual novel format to show the story, because at first glance they say it seems like an adventure game would be the first pick for this
Mm,
kind of a design. And I think that's a really interesting question. Do any of you want to throw in your feelings? Because I definitely have feelings.
I think I think personally I like the visual novel format because it's super accessible and a lot of different people can play that. You can see the format of this game, you can see how it's playing, and it clicks how it works easy for people that play games and don't play games, and that's what I like about the way that we chose for this.
mhm. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think when we were, thinking about target audience and thinking about the types of people who might want to play this game or engage with this content, we were definitely looking at folks who, were going to be drawn in by the narrative, and we didn't want to, make the experience overly complex by adding additional, navigation mechanics or things like that. Like, I think the gem of this project um, is really the narrative and the characters. We wanted to highlight and focus on that. Carol, what are
I
your
think
feelings? Tell us.
my feelings are the honest truth that it was also very, very much about scoping. So when we started this project, it was a student project that we were working
Mm-hmm.
together on for 3 months. We had 3 months to do it. And our goal was just to create a narrative experience that, like we mentioned in the seminar, a narrative experience that um, subverted the common relationships that we see in games. And we often, a lot of times we see that in visual novels. And also, when we were trying to figure out like the way to implement these mechanics that we were coming up with, um, we just kind of realized that the easiest way would be if it was more static, the way that a lot of visual novels are formatted, so that we didn't have to worry about adding in a lot of other gameplay mechanics, point and click, adventure type stuff. It was frankly just like a lot easier for us to implement this concept, because we call this an experimental game. This is a very experimental mechanic, and it was way easier for us to focus on that mechanic and make that mechanic the best it could be, while trimming down a lot of the other gameplay mechanics so that it was just like the focus. So that would be my answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of scope as well, so this is a question that we get a lot because We Should Talk is a short form narrative game. So it's meant to be replayed many different times and it has many different endings. But the overall sort of, I guess, like gameplay time of one play session is relatively short compared to other games. So, a question that we get a lot is how do we limit our scope and what do we determine what goes in the game and what might eventually get scrapped?
I think
Yeah.
one of the things that I looked at with each conversation is that they all had to generally be comparable in length. So the moment like I start like if I'm writing and I start going on a dark deep tangent with one character, that means that the four other characters also need to have something to back that up. And at that rate, the game just gets longer and longer and goes away from our original goal of making it bite sized. So it was just
Again,
oh
oh,
yeah, go.
sorry, go ahead.
So it was just a matter of keeping all those things at one hand, and also the the people power that we had to playtest all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like just thinking about the original timeline that we had, and then looking at that and thinking about, okay, well, we're all graduating. We all really want to make sure that this game sees the light of day. So, how can we make it a really good experience in as short of a period, like as short of a time as possible? So we had last summer to work on it because of the NYU Game Center. They accepted us into their incubator program and actually paid us to work on it during the summer, which was the first time we've been able to devote substantial time to it since the class that we originally developed it in. And so that was another 3 months on top of the original 3 months that we worked on it. And then we've been working on it part time ever since, but we have to look at every single new feature and say, is this worth us stretching this out, taking longer, and like continuing to, add more work on our plates, when we also know that we are, some of us were starting full-time jobs after graduation, some of us were focusing on, building studios or freelancing and things. It was very much also just like a personal, what can we do and what can't we do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think those are all really good points. And also to answer one of the questions in chat, yes, there's multiple endings. We have 9 different endings to this game.
There was an earlier question actually that I would like to tie into that. Someone asked if the 9 drinks at the bar were the 9 drinks at the bar in Brooklyn at the time. And maybe they can, eWizard might be able to expand on this question. But yeah, so I think what eWizard noticed was that there was on the wall, especially behind Jimmy, there is a chalkboard with a list of drinks. And those drinks actually represent each of the 9 endings. So you'll notice they're numbered 1 through 9. That's not how much they cost. Maybe in the game it is, but that's kind of like a game dev inside scoop, that those are actually a little bit of an Easter egg, because each drink we hand selected a drink that would coincide with the feel of that particular ending.
People in chat like that. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like it's a neat design decision, and also I think like we wanted everything to feel very coherent, right? And like it all fits into this little world in this little bar that we've built. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I see Quirk of Art in the chat saying they're so shaken and smart in this game, and I just I need to make a shaken not stirred joke, and that's the entire joke.
I love
Amazing.
it. All right, I'm gonna jump to another question. So in romance games, there's been a trend towards letting players design their own player character, right, to engage with the NPCs or the romanceable options, right, in the game, rather than having it be an authored character. So yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about our main character design and how that added to, I guess, like some of the complexity of writing this game and having to make that decision, right, of like how much of this character is the player and how much is predetermined in the world.
All of the characters in game were based off of not only the team in our backgrounds and our experiences, but like just things that we wanted to see out of it, and making the game on all fronts more catered to a specific experience as opposed to letting people create their character just kind of fit the goals of what we were trying to go for in that regard a little bit better. So making characters is cool, and theoretically that'd be great, right? But it just wouldn't. I don't feel like it would have fit for what we were trying to accomplish with telling this story.
Yeah, and that was actually a huge conversation very, very early on to the design of the game too, was like, there's always the conversation of, okay, do we want it to be an authored character, or do we want it to be customizable, like Francesca was saying in the question? And then I remember very specifically, we were kind of aiming for something in between, because, we know that this character is who they are. And I say they because we actually had the conversation early on that this is a non-binary character, because we felt that it was important. Like, 'cause I see somebody in chat saying, I thought that this was a male character until Sam mentioned being gay, when in fact, like, we didn't honestly care how you saw, the character so much as you saw the character as being a representation of yourself. Sort of like that blank slate approach, but you could still separate yourself a little bit from them, in that, they're different enough from you. You can experiment, you can play, you can explore a different side of yourself with them, but also you are communicating as them and they are communicating as you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I remember that, like, we Yeah, going off of that, we had a lot of discussions early on about like, oh, what if this is just like a completely sort of blank slate character that we want the player to project onto. And that was really difficult when we started writing, because the whole thing about this game is you're exploring some of these like pre-existing relationship dynamics. And if you as a player are entering into this situation and you don't know any of these characters and you don't have a history with them, it's difficult to have that sort of like intimacy, or be able to jump into these topics that we wanted to discuss. So the main character became much more defined within themselves and within the space, just so we knew kind of like what are the pre-existing relationships that they have, why are they even in this space, while still giving the player agency into how they react to certain prompts within situations. So
we do have a technical question from chat. If we can balance audio a little bit. It sounds like Jordan and I are a little quiet, maybe.
Yes, I can turn myself down.
Okay.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that same person had a follow-up question to the visual novel question. Mm-hmm. They said, and this would actually be a great question for Nobo, who is unfortunately not here because she's sick and in Bangladesh and couldn't stay up until 5 a.m. to hang out with us on chat.
I'm glad she's resting. So,
but they ask if the cyberpunkish vibes that are in the kind of classic visual or classic recent visual novel style, similar to Valhalla, if that was intended. And I just like to throw out that, yeah, like that came from a lot of creative design and development of figuring out what we wanted our vibe to be. And Francesca, if you want to talk a little bit about your role in that, and like, how we all kind of co-developed this art style with Nobo directing us.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. Yeah, obviously Nobo would have much better insight into this, I think. But as Carol was saying, that like those similarities are intentional, and I think like it's intentional for a reason. I think there's obviously like a reason that this aesthetic has become really popular for these types of games that are centered around conversation. And it's also the reason why you do see bars like this, right, in real life. We wanted to make something that felt, modern, but also intimate. And when we were designing this game and working on this game, we did field research where we actually went out to a lot of different bars and like looked at the atmospheres there, and also observing like how do different styles of bars or different atmospheres sort of like encourage different behavior. Like, is this a bar that people go to for happy hour with their friends? Is this a bar that people, wander into late at night to have a beer by themselves? So those were some of the things that we were thinking about as we were designing this space. And I think like naturally having a space that is sort of more, small and like darker, I think generally it naturally invites more intimate conversation. So that's something we were definitely thinking about.
One question in the chat that I wanted to address from earlier, also from eWizard. Do y'all hate peanut butter? Yeah, I do. I don't like it at all.
That comes through in your writing, Jordan.
That's so funny.
Oh my god.
And I think we have some like character questions. So were any of the characters you talked to inspired by anyone?
I would like to say that the characters were more so inspired by our experiences than they were actually like people.
Actual people, yeah.
So like it's an amalgam of experiences that we've all had. Particularly Sam, I think, like whether we were the vulnerable and dependent person, or we were in a relationship with a vulnerable dependent person, it kind of like became a little bit of that. What about Carol? I think that there's some particular things that we put in the game that were based off your experiences as well.
Yeah, I mean, I especially so the alpha, I had a bigger hand in co-writing with Jordan, and a lot of that. The way that we divided the work for the original alpha was Jordan wrote the text conversations with Sam, and I wrote the in-person conversations. And when I was writing those conversations, I was absolutely pulling from I had originally written the bartender to kind of be like myself almost in a way of being like the really caring but maybe a little bit too nosy friend. And then Jimmy, who was not Jimmy at the time, I don't even remember his name, was just every creep that I've ever run into at a game dev event who
What was
goes
the
too far and tries too hard and just won't let it go. And like it was that conversation made a lot of people very uncomfortable.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
um,
especially just talking about that, like that Jimmy's character changed really
so
drastically from
much.
the original like stranger character. And yeah, I honestly can't even remember his name, which
Yeah.
feels weird now because we spent so much time on those conversations and those interactions. But yeah, I think like that was a really drastic way that it changed since the alpha, right? Because we wanted to explore, how do you talk to someone who you don't know, who's like really trying to be more intimate with you, and allowing the player to either embrace that or like completely reject that. So
Yeah.
that conversation goes in like very different directions depending on how you
Yeah.
respond. Yeah.
I want to be super clear that like Jimmy is not that character anymore. So like I see
Mm-hmm.
somebody saying like, uh-oh, but the fact is like Jordan took those frameworks of
Mm-hmm.
characters that we created together early on and that like I wrote out of very deep trauma in some cases.
Sorry.
Oh, hi Doug. And really added so much nuance and humanity, that I think it's worth noting that like that's where that originated, but he has definitely evolved, and a lot of his experience, Jimmy's experience, comes again from our shared experience, our friends' shared experience, from talking to friends about like what they've gone through. That was a very big process, and also like I am I am friends with a lot of my exes, and so like a lot of the ex conversations, a lot of the breakup conversations and stuff that drew a lot from that. Um, so yeah, like it's and also, I mean, we talked about switching Sam over to being a white Midwestern woman,
Yeah.
you know. So we pulled a lot from each other's experiences throughout that writing process. And I mean, even Steph, the bartender, we chose her kind of like nationality and background based on Kat and Francesca's um, histories and heritage. So yeah, there's like so much of all of us in this game.
Yeah. Quick question: were there any funny glitches that were found? I mean, this isn't a game with like a ton of room for glitches, but earlier on, there was one scenario where every time we went to Jimmy, he was just halfway through the floor, and it's real funny to
I
me.
think yeah, I think the best bugs are always like awful rigging bugs. And to answer another question of like who made the characters, I made the characters. I am not primarily a 3D artist. I am definitely not a rigging expert. So we had some pretty fun rigging bugs of just like arms going
Ah!
absolutely where they were not supposed to go. It's always fun. Just like crazy creepy rigging bugs are always my favorite in games. So I'm
Yeah,
glad I was able to bring that to this project.
yeah.
Another question that we see: are there any other games that your team took mechanic
Mm.
or thematic inspiration from? And I want to take this back to when Carol was talking about before when we were doing this for a class. Um, there were multiple days where the group got together, had a lot of alcohol, and played not only different visual novels, very different narrative games, watched movies. So we kind of had this all had the same kind of tentpole of references that we were getting from. So at the time, there were a lot of visual novels that came out that year, or a lot of narrative games rather that came out that year. Uh,
Yeah.
I think some that we like for our experience, some we didn't. I'm not gonna say what is what, but we definitely played Emily's Away and loved how they dealt with like conversation mechanics and not only like capturing the experience of being on AIM when we were capturing the experience of being on the phone is
Yeah.
served as a huge like reference for us.
Yeah, that was a core one. And also uh, One Missed Call, which
Yeah,
was a free game on itch.io when we were developing this. That was also a huge point of reference, especially also the way they did endings for that. really informed the way that we handled endings for ours. I'd also like to mention, you, Jordan, you talked about referencing Emily as Away. We had the huge luck to be able to, like, one of our first playtesters, the first time we ever demoed this game in public, our alpha, was actually Kyle Seeley, the developer of Emily is Away.
Yeah.
And we like all kind of had a mini heart attack when we realized, like, oh my God, the person whose game we referenced during development of this is literally sitting down and playing this game right now. And he liked it so much, he like he stuck around for like an hour just talking about it and talking about like his experience with it, how he felt about it. And we just kind of continued that conversation with him. It was amazing. So I know we've shouted out to Kyle before in previous streams, but shout out to Kyle Seeley for being such an amazing source of support and mentorship while we developed this. It's so cool.
Yeah, I'll never forget what he said after playing it, because it was one short sentence that like put the seed in my head of that this is something that we could continue with. He's like, "So when's it coming out?"
Yeah, exactly.
Like, all right.
That's always a good moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like I also want to mention that like this game has found such support, I think. In terms of mentors who have been willing to give us feedback, folks who have downloaded previous demos and sent us feedback, or done like, as we were saying in chat, like reporting bugs, super duper helpful. So we really appreciate that. And we are currently part of the Steam Festival, and you can actually download a demo now and add us to your wish list to continue supporting, which is really, really appreciated. We also did a successful Kickstarter, which was incredible. We had like over 700 backers, and just folks who were excited about this game and wanted to support it. So we're like super duper grateful for all the support. Just wanted to say thanks.
We have a few questions from the Steam chat I like to hit. The easy one is there a release date planned, or is it still being developed? Mm-hmm. We have not yet announced the release date. The release window is summer 2020. Yes, it's summer 2020, so stay tuned for a release date. It is still in development insofar as it is currently in like absolute final QA and bug fixing and console certification. So we're launching on all of the main consoles. We're launching on PC, Mac, Xbox, Linux, Switch, and PS4 soon. So so stay tuned. We will be announcing a release date very soon, and we'll be also, we'll be out sometime this summer. So
and I also wanted to say I really appreciate, I know some folks in chat have streamed it also, and that's a really great way to like tell folks about it and spread the word. So since we are a smaller team, and for many of us this is our first like commercial game release, so the more that you can just like grab a friend and tell them about it if you think they would be into it, that's extremely helpful. So thank you.
Right. So what are the other questions? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say more questions. It's time for more questions.
Yeah, more questions. I want to make sure that the Steam gets attention since we're on the festival. Thor, once again, thank you so much for all of your questions. I've seen someone playing earlier. That was BU, thanks to Whitethorn, the community developer for Whitethorn. Was that the final build? And are we to expect 9 endings? That was a near final build. So we are still implementing, since the build that BU was playing, we are implementing more settings and like text speed settings and audio settings, and like just minor bug fixes. But yes, we are going to have 9 endings in the game. And then the other question is, does anybody want to add to that?
No, that was... I also see that B is actually in the Steam chat as well. So thank you, B.
Yeah, thanks, B. And then the other question, which we kind of touched on already, but I think Jordan might have some more answers to this, is are there any Easter eggs?
Easter eggs is an interesting way to put it. I think all of the Easter eggs in the game, for me, outside of the thing that we mentioned before, which is the bar menu, which represents our endings, there's enough jokes and references in there. There's just enough that I would consider Easter eggs. A lot of it is from personal experience, from all of us. So some of these are just direct references to things that might have happened to our lives and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say that there are a ton of findable Easter eggs in the game, unless you want to consider like all 9 endings being one of them.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And I would also say, I mean, just the fact that there are so many conversations to discover and unlock throughout gameplay, I would consider that things to find. That, I mean, even BU on the stream earlier had never seen, I mean, how many times have you played B? Like, probably like at least 2 or 3 dozen times so far. And even still, she had never seen one of the conversations early in the game that can be unlocked. Even during the demo, you can unlock that conversation. And so there's a lot of she's still complaining about a missed pun that we did not implement, that maybe we should go back and implement it just for B, where we say something about making a sandwich for Sam, and she said you have to call it a Sam-wich.
How did I miss that?
How did we miss that? I think that was one of the few conversations that I had a heavy hand in writing, and so it was probably my severe aversion to super silly puns like that, but I'm getting over it.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of the like, they're not like, I guess, like the standard definition of Easter eggs, but like the things that bring me joy when I discover them are the like, yeah, just really silly responses that you can create, and sometimes like we've slipped in some like, yeah, like you can say like
the turd.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, what is it like? Don't let turds
turd.
control you, or like don't let turds come between us, and like that's something that you can say, and like contextually in that moment it makes sense, but it's also really ridiculous, and it just it makes me happy.
Well, the conversation goes, because this was again like the kind of thing that I would say, anxiety is a real turd though. Like, I've probably said those words so many times, just the line, anxiety is a real turd though. And then your response is, don't let, or you shouldn't let, or like, why allow? And then it's like, those feelings, those thoughts, turds. To control you, to hurt you, so like, you can say some really goofy stuff, thanks to the wonderful art of modularity.
Yeah, it's so much fun. And I think also being able to like like play with just like texting lingo, right? Or like how you might say something through text that you probably wouldn't say in real life. Yeah, so those are just, yeah, I appreciate that a lot.
I've also never worked on a game that I didn't make sure had a poop joke in it.
Oh yeah.
This is true, actually. In the years I've known you, that is totally true.
Every single, like, there are games that I work on now on contract that I make sure get some poop jokes in there.
Like AAA games.
Yeah, I remember, I think, Carol, when we were at the Game Center as well, like our very first class we made a game in, we had to make a game about chickens, and your chickens were pooping. I remember
mine
this,
were too.
Right?
Chickens weren't pooping. No,
Mine
Jordan's
were pooping.
Jordan's were pooping.
Yeah.
My chickens were laying eggs and getting run over by a McDonald's truck.
Oh, goodness. That was also really dark. Y'all.
Ooh, oh no, they were getting eaten by foxes, and then they hopped on a McDonald's trucks to go become. Never mind. You can play it on carolmertz.itch.io.
I love that.
There's one quick. Go on. Francesca.
Yeah, I was gonna say just a quick question about save states. Or will the runs be too short that it makes the saves redundant? So, do y'all want to speak to this a little bit of just like format of the short form narrative game?
We actively decided not to implement save states because of because the game is very short. It's about 20 to 30 minutes to play through, and the emotional gravity of the game is such that like we want you to experience it all in one go. If you walk away from it, it doesn't have that same emotional weight to it of like maintaining these conversations and these relationships. But that's also why it's so short, is like, not only is it really, really challenging to make 27 different possible coherent responses for every single time you say something in the game, but also it's a challenging game just to play because of how emotionally heavy it is. And so we were trying to balance that, and ultimately, we decided that it saves the endings that you've unlocked,
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have the option to save your state within gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another question from Steam. Oh, where you had something to say?
No,
Francesca?
go for it. Take it away.
The hardest thing you've done developing the game. I imagine this question might have different answers for all of us.
God, it's just it's rigging for me because it's hard.
I think for me, it was the alpha version of the game. Grad school is very hard. Working, which is, I mean, I had 2 jobs at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing this extremely emotionally taxing game, where the actual writing of the game, as we mentioned, is more comparable to puzzle design than anything else I had done at that point. And it was extremely stressful, just technically doing the writing, while at the same time the heavy emotional labor that was going on as we were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
All that with the stress of, 18 credits of grad school and 3 or 4 other games that we had to have probably been working on at the same time. That was a testament to how much I could handle at one time and cannot handle at one time at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you and I, we would get together for like writer's room workshop type things to work on it together. And we would just like stare at each other with dead eyes, being like, this is so hard. I'm exhausted. And I feel like you also had like just like family stuff happening, and like it was just such a difficult semester. And I'm so impressed and amazed with how much we were able to get done in those 3 months.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. No, that's 100% true. I feel like I don't remember half of it. I feel like we were just always working, and then suddenly there was like a game, and we did it. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, just getting the alpha done was easily the hardest. I think turning it into the beta and like the final build, what you see now, was actually for me pretty enjoyable. There's always going to be difficult aspects to game development, but we have a team, like especially the active core team that we've been working with. Like we've worked together for so long at this point. The 3 of us who you see here, and Nobo, the art director, that we really, I mean, we've figured out ways to communicate. We've figured out ways to collaborate in such a way that it's been pretty smooth for the last year or so. And I feel really lucky that we've been able to do so much in such a short period of time.
Yeah, and I think that was a big part of it, as well as like learning how much we can handle as well, which I think was a really important thing. As we mentioned, like the timeline where we were like really actively working on this game, either during school or during the incubator where we were actually working on this full time, each of those timelines was very short. So it took a lot of like prioritization and focus. So yeah, it was definitely just, I don't know, the hardest part of making a game is making the game.
Exactly.
It's all hard.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
But I mean, also, like, I think something that's worth noting is it took us, of those 3 months that we talk about where the alpha was first being developed, it took a full month to get it to the point where it resembled what you see now.
Yeah.
A full month of ideation and prototyping and scrapping prototypes. I mean, we probably did 2 or 3 dozen prototypes of different mechanics. And we went through so many different narrative ideas and so many different concepts and scrapped them all until finally this one just kind of fell into place. And at that point, it almost feels accidental. But of course, it's not accidental, because you've just gone through an entire 4-week process of ideation and iteration. But yeah, like that was like, I remember how stressed we all were because we felt like we were failing.
Yeah.
That we hadn't come up with our final game idea. But ultimately, that's what led to this, frankly, what I feel is a brilliant, like never before seen mechanic, that ultimately is the game that we have now and that we're all very proud of. So don't be afraid of failing and scrapping ideas and iterating and doing that for a long time, because it feels hard and it feels really frustrating, but ultimately that's where your best ideas will come from.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Jumping back to a question in chat. So we've been talking a lot about how a lot of the topics in the game are really emotional or very intense. And working on this game as well as playing it can be kind of emotionally taxing, right? Depending on how close you are to the content. And obviously, as writers and as designers working on this project, we are very close to this content. So there's a question about, were there particular topics or pieces of this game in the writing that were particularly emotionally taxing or potentially even triggering that we had to work through. And also I think my extension of that question is also we talked a little bit about the stranger conversation that was in the alpha that we ultimately completely rewrote for sort of similar reasons, right? About being really close to that subject matter and having it be possibly too difficult for players to engage with in a way that was made a meaningful and thoughtful experience. I think some parts of that conversation we determined were just uncomfortable, right? So how do you balance that, or how do you address those things while writing this?
So I want to tell a specific story. No, it's fine. Yeah. I want to tell a specific story that I don't think I've ever told live before. There's, without getting too spoilery, there's a conversation that talks about race discrimination in the dating world that happens in the game. And I was writing that conversation right as hearings were going on for in the United States about considering the United States government considering creating a committee to figure out what reparations for African Americans would be. And so that entire time, it just happened to line up with me writing that conversation, which made that conversation, without a doubt, the most mentally taxing conversation that I had to write in the game, because I'm actively writing about racial discrimination while issue that's extremely important to me about my place in the United States as a Black person was going on. And that was probably the most difficult thing to write for this entire game for me. I mean, there are relationship things that definitely found its way into the game that made that were hard, but that one was the one that the timing of that was just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, I mean, I never had any experiences that heavy when I was writing. I remember, you didn't really even talk about that with the development team at the time. I know that you brought up, some situations were more stressful than others.
Yeah.
To write about, and I very much remember there were days that it was clear that it was just painful to do work.
A lot of the conversations in the game also just unintentionally ended up reflecting things that came too close to me out of accident, I guess. There are characters that are kind of close to people in my life that it wasn't even my idea to make them that way, but it just happened to be so perfect, and I was like, we have to roll with this. So that ended up becoming a little bit more taxing in certain months than others.
Good question. A follow-up question to that is, if this isn't too personal to answer, did any of you break down in tears as you went through some of the dialogue?
I don't think our team did, but we actually have had moments at events actually where players have become really emotional playing through the game, even on a show floor, right, with other people around. And I think that's not, I don't know. Yeah, I always think that maybe that's not the type of environment to show these types of games, because we really want people to sit with their thoughts and be thoughtful. And just being able to see that even in those sorts of environments, people were able to get really emotionally invested and really take the time to think about the content. And have an emotional reaction to it. I think that was really powerful, I think, for me.
Yeah, same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, likewise. I mean, I don't know that I cried But I do remember, and like, I mean, Jordan touched on this a bit, but I remember like really digging up, like for some of the bits that I did have a hand in writing, I remember really digging up a lot of difficult feelings because, like, you know, I helped out with some of the endings and some of the breakup endings, and like tapping into those experiences that I had and remembering those feelings and thinking about the way that I reacted or they reacted, and trying to get that down on paper so that it was believable. I remember just being like so draining. But yeah, crying. I don't know that I shed a tear.
I wept openly. Yeah, but I think that's oh, man, I lost my train of thought for a moment. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like, writing from our own experiences, right? Like it's just automatically very emotional because we're putting a lot of ourselves into this content and into this game. And I think, like, even when we were discussing like what type of content we wanted to put in here, like, we had to be very vulnerable with each other and with our own experiences. And I think, like, when you're thinking about those, like, yeah, those past moments of like, oh, I have to write a breakup scene, like, let me dig into my own experiences. Going off of something you said earlier, also just the entire, you know, premise of this game is like replaying it and thinking about like, what should I have said, right? Or like, how could that have turned out differently? And I think when you revisit those like very emotionally charged and intense moments and decisions in your life, like, that's automatically, I think, something you start thinking about, which is it's really difficult, I think, just, you know, whether it's with this game and with writing or just like in general, right? Thinking about those moments. And I think that's ultimately why this game is difficult for people to play, right? Because they're transported back to those moments and they're thinking about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, my cat keeps trying to.
Hi, Dinah.
Scream.
To go to a little bit more of a technical question, or a question that we've answered in previous streams, that I like answering. Were there long conversations about how much punctuation to use in the text parts, or the length of text from Sam in general? And the answer is yeah. we had a lot of discussion about that particular thing, because not only were we defining who Sam was through the way that she talked, but like what type of texting experience we wanted players to have, and what did it mean for the players in the game and how old they were. Because even from the team, we have different ways that we text and styles that we text, and how the characters represented those texts became like a huge conversation of like, and it, like, disagreement, but like healthy disagreement of like who they need to be or how they are going to express themselves. And I know we had some, you know, advisors and mentors of like different age groups that like one had a very negative response to the first thing Sam says to you, where she's like cooking din din. They did not like the din din.
They were like, din din? What human says din din?
Don't say it like that in case they're watching this.
We appreciate you.
We love them.
Yeah.
They know that we love them, but that was just like the most hilarious response to that.
Yeah, and I think that was something that also made us realize that we could really play with the texting, right? Because I think that's something that's very specific to like our generation, right? Of like you know, starting to communicate with people primarily through text, and like, you know, how do you be flirty? How do you be serious? Like all of these different sort of things. So yeah. I wanted to take some questions from Steam really quickly. So one of them is, are there any plans on DLCs or maybe a sequel?
We have not had any detailed conversations about that, about any sequels or DLC for the game.
Yeah, I think we, as I said, like, we've had a ton of support so far, but I'm definitely curious to see, once we launch the game, kind of what the reception is. I definitely think, like, just based on the amount of I don't know, like depth to this, I think like we could absolutely make a million DLCs and a million sequels exploring different topics and different characters. But right now we don't have any concrete plans.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in the talk, we even like this is a mechanic that can be applied to so many different things, right?
Yeah.
So many different, like it could be an action thing where it's like shoot the person with the carrot in the steam room or something, you know. But we haven't really had any real detailed ideas or conversation about where that might go, or if we wanted to go there.
And then one other quick question from Steam, asking about if we have like a favorite Let's Player or streamer that we're really excited for, like to play this game, or we would like to see play this game. I was thinking about this, and I think like for me, it's probably Jenny, or she goes by Kim Chica on Twitch.
Yeah, Jenny Wyndham. She's
yeah,
great.
so she actually works at a game development studio as well, and I've watched her play, and she plays a lot of independent, like smaller indie games, and just the way that she talks about the content and explores kind of the depth of games is really great. So yeah, I would absolutely love to see her play through this and like see her opinion. So
yeah,
I don't have a large repertoire of like streamers and let's players in my mind, but Quirk of Art in the chat, can't wait to see you stream it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
And I know my friends, my old like high school friends, really love Burleasy. Don't really watch Burleasy, know nothing about them, but like I know that he's a prominent like Black Let's Player.
That's awesome.
Which is like would be important to me to like reach my audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Oh, so this one is... Yeah, go ahead.
The one about getting visibility in the industry
Yeah.
is a... Yeah. So the question is, it may be a larger question, and it is, but I think it's an important one. What difficulties in the industry do you see for people making these sorts of experimental games, these sort of niche, sometimes narrative, sometimes experimental games to get noticed? Show floors aren't a good space for deeper emotional discovery, and like we said, we agree with that. And games incubators can be hard to get into. So do you see any ways for this sort of content to get a broader audience?
Yeah, I think that's a loaded question, and I do want to also acknowledge that like because of the place where we started this project, right, where we were in grad school and we had a lot of mentors and resources at our disposal, I think that's really what enabled us to make a game like this. And I'm not sure if we could have done it, or it would have been a very different game if we had done that in a different space, right?
Yeah, we had a ton of resources, and this came at levels, right? So student game for a specific class goes on to incubator, goes on to get a publisher, Whitethorn Games, goes on to have a successful Kickstarter. Like there were levels to how we were able to get this game out there.
Yeah, and they fed into each other as well, right?
Exactly. And I mean, visual novels or narrative games in general are a niche genre, and I would say that they don't generally play well at cons or or like expos and stuff like that. So in our case, for us, it was very much an amalgam of a ton of things that allowed us to get where we are right now.
I think it's an interesting question in general, because I mean, I think even non-niche indie games are having this problem, especially right now, where there are no more in-person events, and if your game doesn't show well at an in-person event or isn't like really designed for that, how do you get visibility? And I think that this is an ongoing question in the industry as a whole. There's platforms like itch.io, which are amazing, and they really democratize game publishing. The problem is you wind up in a mass of thousands of other games. How do you get seen? And I think the answer is it's different for everyone. So for some people, I mean, there's some publishers like Fellow Traveler, who only publish narrative games, really focus on digital communications, digital outreach, digital marketing. They don't really do a lot of in-person events because they're aware that narrative games don't show super well in person. And for us, we have gone to a lot of events. you can see our stream still only has 30 people watching it. So have we gotten the visibility? It's who's to say. We're so grateful that you're here, but are we gonna be able to survive off of this game's launch into the next game? We can't really answer that definitively or with a lot of confidence at this point, because we have to acknowledge this is an experimental game. And we got all of that support, and we're still not sure what launch is going to look like for us.
Yeah.
So can we answer that question? No. Can we do our best and talk about how, like, the path that we took? Yeah, but I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that every single game is going to need to take a different path.
If you haven't already, speaking about visibility, go to Steam and wishlist us. That super helps visibility and helps the Steam algorithm show and feature indies like us way more than if we didn't have those.
Yeah, like, we're doing our best. We're trying so hard, but we're also, a team of 6 in total, and 4 of us are actively still working on it. So, and we have the support of Whitethorn Games, but they're also a small publisher. And so, we're doing everything we can, and it's hard. It's hard to publish games. So, but yeah, thank you for that question, because I think it's important to talk about the reality of what it means to publish an indie game, because we a lot of times just see, the huge games, the games that are, like, even on the Steam Festival right now, the games with thousands of viewers at once.
That's
that
such a good point.
Already have thousands of wish lists.
Yeah, that's such a good point, that you only see the success stories, right, very often. So you're not even hearing about those folks that are struggling or didn't quite make it to the front page of something, right? So yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
But for us, honestly, again, we never saw this as being early on. We were like, this is a really cool project that we got to do for class, and then people kept encouraging us to finish it and make it a commercial game, and just releasing it is a huge success for us. Getting to the point where we get to launch simultaneously on every single console.
That's a huge deal.
All together, and for a lot of our team, it's our first game ever launched. And so it is in itself a success for us. So
I had to take a seat the first time I saw it running on other things.
Right, on the Switch, it's mind-blowing, honestly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so we are, I think, just about at the end of the time we allotted for the stream, but if we have any last-minute questions, open to taking those before we head off.
I'm so excited to see eWizard in chat. Bottle of grenadine and a bottle of absinthe waiting for launch date with 5 tiny glasses. That's how to party like Jeff.
Are we morally obligated to have something in 5 grenadine and 5 Chinese shot glasses when this game launches? Is that something that we have to do as a team?
I think so.
Oh my god.
We should do a little.
Grenadine is so gross.
It is very gross. We could do a little online launch party. I think that would be fun.
That would be really fun.
Yeah.
We should definitely do that. But yeah, that is definitely a holdover from the alpha, and I remember writing that, being like, what's the stupidest thing that you can order at a bar?
Yeah.
Grenadine straight up.
Oh man.
In 5 tiny shot glasses.
Now I'm just thinking about when I'm just thinking about when we were doing field research, right? And we would go to bars and need to order something, and I think one time I think the bartender convinced me to order their ginger drink, and I don't even like ginger. I don't know if y'all remember this, but it was.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You hated it.
But then y'all tasted it, and it was too much. It was too much ginger.
Oh no.
God, I just
I forget the name of that bar, but it's the one that we reference the most often when we talk about
the Understudy, right? The one.
Understudy, yes.
Yeah, I just remember that because they have that awesome neon sign in there, right?
Yeah, at
So
Decal
cool.
Market in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
in downtown Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And it also
that's a good
was
bar.
the bar there where Carol and I had the longest conversation with the bartender about what they do and how their experiences. That was, I think, for me, that was very informative.
Yeah, they were great. They were a good sport. Someone asks merch when. That's a good question. So we're going to be launching a backer kit. That if you backed us on Kickstarter, you're going to get a notification about this. If you didn't back us on Kickstarter, you'll still be able to use the backer kit to buy merch for a limited period of time. We're not sure the exact date, but it should be soon. We did talk about doing We Should Talk shot glasses, but we decided it would be too much of a pain in the butt. So we decided not to do We Should Talk shot glasses, but we're working on stickers, t-shirts, and we already have the pins that are up on the Whitethorn Games store that you'll also be able to buy through the backer kit.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, the pins are super cute. They're just the little We Should Talk bubble, and I love them.
Yeah, and I also want to say, in chat, thank you so much for wish listing. Yeah, even if you're intending to buy it on a different platform, it honestly just helps us get ahead of like the Steam algorithm a little bit. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, they have like a threshold where like once you hit a certain number of thousands of wish lists, which is super hard to get for an indie, that's when you start getting more access to like visibility. So it's very much, a challenge to jump over all those steps. But thanks to amazing communities like y'all, we're getting closer every single day. So we thank you so much.
Yeah. Right,
we did we did think about coasters. We did think about Benny was like, have you thought about coasters? We actually talked about it, but we're like, nobody's gonna buy coasters.
Buy coasters.
I don't know. Yeah, I feel like people like the idea of coasters, and then you have them and you're like,
I use coasters every single day. Look at this.
I have like one, you can't even see it. I have like one that I use literally all the time, and I've every other coaster I've gotten, I've immediately lost because I only use this one.
Yeah, I love coasters. Stonks coaster. Oh my god, chat's blowing up.
Maybe we could do fancy like wooden laser engraved coasters or something. Like something that is like a cool little
artifact. That's what these are.
Yeah, like those are cool. That's awesome.
So cute. Yeah. Cool.
All right, so I think with that, we are gonna wrap up the stream. Let me hop over here really quick because we do have an upcoming stream as well on July 10th. So please tune back in for that. We're going to be doing a look at also that's right, isn't it? It is July 10th. I want to make sure I have the right date. Is that right?
Yes.
Awesome.
It
okay.
is.
It's on the graphic,
next,
so I trust it.
Because it was like we were like we need a breather.
Yeah, absolutely. So on July 10th, we're going to be doing a developer retrospective live stream. So we're actually going to be looking at the alpha build of the game, which is going to be really cool. So we'll show you some of the like drastic design changes and changes in the characters and conversations that happened when we like extended the game past the alpha. So I'm really excited about that. So our Kickstarter did just wrap up, but as Carol said, we're going to be launching a backer kit. So if you do want to get in on that, please follow us on Twitter so we can post and let you know when that's happening. We are a part of the Steam festival that's going on right now, so you can download and play a free demo. Please add us to your wish list, and when the game comes out, the next best way to support us, like after launch, is to leave a Steam review as well. So positive reviews are really important, again, for visibility, but also when other folks visit our page, they can see that this is something that people are already enjoying and have had good experiences with, and that really helps convince other folks that they should try the game as well. Is there anything else that I should plug? Did I forget anything?
Just like to thank our amazing community who showed up for the stream. Like, thank you all so much. We like we said early on, like we had questions prepped because we're like, what if nobody shows up and we just have to talk to ourselves? And like, I'm so overwhelmed with like all of your support and like all of your like how active y'all have been and just how amazingly kind you're all being. So we cannot thank you enough for being here and for being part of our community.
Yeah.
Each and every one of you, just like you're helping us get through this like launch hump so hard. And it just means so much to see your support and to know that y'all are excited about the game. So thank you.
Appreciate everybody that came out to the chat. I do want to quickly plug something that I'm doing later this week.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to be a part of the OS NYC 13-hour charity stream for Juneteenth called Juneteenth Live. So on Friday, you'll be able to find me, I think around 7 something, but in the evening on twitch.tv/OS_operating system, and I'll be talking about my experience as a developer.
And so you can follow Jordan on Twitter for those updates, because it might be easier to grab those links from Jordan's Twitter, which is @Versified. You can also find We Should Talk on Twitter. Cheska just posted it, _We Should Talk. You can find Cheska on Twitter @Chesky. With 3 eyes, and I'm sure she's going to post that because it's a challenge to spell.
I started putting all of them. You can see like my focus space in the stream, but I also realized they're literally on the screen. So
Oh yeah. And you can find me @Carol Mertz. And so we're going to be posting about other things that we're doing. Definitely follow the We Should Talk Twitter so that you get all the updates about release date announcement and future streams and other events that we do, and including Jordan's Juneteenth event this Friday. So stay tuned and stay amazing, and thank you again.
All right. I guess with that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. All right.
Bye everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.